One of my strongest memories as a kid growing up in Washington is when I discovered the sports page of the Washington Post, and one writer in particular, Shirley Povich. Those were the days when Shirley, not his son Maury, was the famous Povich in the family. I remember getting up late for school, stuffing the sports section between my books, and in class secretly reading Povich's account of the Redskins' Sunday exploits. Somehow, I didn't feel I had really seen Sonny Jurgensen hit Jerry Smith on that post pattern until I read Povich's account of it. As we look back on the life and writings of Shirley Povich, we say, thank you, Shirley, for all those mornings. Povich has no idea how many times he's heard our national anthem, more than anyone can count, for it's been his good fortune to be paid to attend practically every major sporting event since 1924. The year the Senators won the World Series, Povich became a sports reporter for the Washington Post. Over the next 7 decades, he was the Post sports page as editor and as writer of his enormously popular column, This Morning. Now 84 and retired, he still contributes occasional columns to the paper. Not a bad life's work for a kid from Bar Harbor, Maine, who never finished school. Of course, this kind of story always begins with that big break, and Shirley Povich's came when he caddied for Edward B. McLean, who happened to own the Washington Post. McLean offered Povich a job and money for college, too.
He suggested that I come to Washington and go to his school, which is Georgetown, and work on his newspaper, which I hadn't known about. However, didn't get any college degree despite many years in college, because at the age of 20, at least before I was 21, Mr. McLean, in some impulsive moment, decided I should be the sports editor of the newspaper. Up to that time, I had been successively a very distinguished career as a copy boy and police reporter, general assignments, rewrite man, and through a wise choice of one city editor, country boy from Maine at 18 is now covering the Vice Squad in Washington, D.C. Well, I must say that that opened my eyes a bit, but I was happy to become a sports reporter.
It would take more time than we have here to do justice to the long and illustrious career of this Dean of Washington sports writers. Suffice it to say that Shirley Povich was there in Chicago's Wrigley Field when Babe Ruth hit his legendary called shot home run in the '32 World Series. Years later, Povich would write the Babe was, in fact, pointing at the pitcher. There when Jackie Robinson broke baseball's color barrier, writing that Robinson was picked for his ability, but even more for his grace under pressure. And there in Yankee Stadium, when a crippled and dying Lou Gehrig, in Povich's words, made strong men weep.
Today, I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth.
To many of us, these sports legends are but shadowy figures on grainy black and white newsreels. But not to sports writer Povich. His writing brought a cast of colorful characters to life, men he knew and in many cases admired, like Senators pitcher Walter Johnson.
The athletes of yesteryear, so-called, were simple, mostly country boys, you understand, and their games were their lives. It was either play baseball for $4,000 or $5,000 a year or go back to the plow. And wherever they came from, you know, baseball meant so much more security for them. And these were the simple times, you see, and more dedication, I think, to the game. than present-day athletes who are diverted.
During World War II, Povich became a war correspondent in the South Pacific. But it was that day of infamy, December 7, 1941, that most sticks out in his mind. The Redskins were playing the Eagles at Griffith Stadium when wire reports came into the press box that Pearl Harbor had been bombed.
Within a few minutes, the loudspeaker began to say the Chief of Naval Operations will go to his office, that Assistant Secretary of Defense, G. Edgar Hoover, so-and-so of the Army, and all of these excitement. Nobody was yet aware George Marshall, owner of the Redskins, wouldn't permit the stadium to know that that Pearl Harbor had occurred, and in his absurd sense of priorities, he said it would interfere with the concentration of the game.
Povich had a rocky relationship with the Redskins' temperamental owner, George Preston Marshall, who banned him from the Redskins' dressing room and even sued him once for libel. Povich won. He says he particularly resented Marshall's attitude toward blacks. In fact, he once wrote that the Redskins' colors were actually burgundy gold and Caucasian.
Naturally, you could resent the hell out of Marshall, and I taunted him for years until people say he became my meal ticket. Well, that's perfectly all right with me.
As Shirley Povich figures it, he's written at least 15,000 articles for the Post over the last 60 years or so. That prodigious estimate comes as no surprise to sports columnist Ken Denlinger, who's been at the paper a mere 24 years.
I think that my generation growing up, Shirley Povich and Herb Bloch were synonymous with the Washington Post. I've come to realize that at that particular period in the late 50s and early 60s, that the Post wasn't necessarily a dominant paper in Washington, but somehow Shirley was within the business. If Red Smith was 1, Shirley was 1A. I researched the Redskin book once, and part of it was the 1937 championship game between the Redskins and the Chicago Bears. Shirley wrote the game story. Shirley wrote the column. There had to be a play-by-play that was run in the paper. Shirley did that. So for what would amount to the Super Bowl of the mid-1930s, Shirley Povich did it all. He did what 3 or 4 people would do today, and did it as well as each one of them.
Now, no story about Povich would be complete without a mention of his first name, apparently a common boy's name in the part of Maine where he grew up, but a constant source of confusion in his professional life. In 1959, Shirley was included in the first edition of Who's Who of American Women, right there between Louise Pound and Hortense Powdermaker.
I said, I've been hearing for years it's no longer a man's world. I was happy to be on the winning side.
Povich is of the old school. In his day, baseball and boxing were king. He once wrote that basketball players don't shoot baskets anymore, they stuff them like taxidermists. And football, well, in his mind, there's just no contest when it comes to America's pastime.
Baseball was out in the open. Football begins with the huddle and the play. And nobody in the stadium, 50, 60,000, knows what is intended.
Povich has been married to his wife Ethel for 58 years. Besides his daughter, he has 2 sons, David, and the other famous Povich, Maury. Shirley Povich says ever since he's retired, he's been behind in his work. At press time, he's down in Florida, ready if baseball spring training ever starts. But whatever happens, no doubt we'll read all about it.